My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
Yeah, okay. Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Well, you may remember that, Donald Trump, he tried to walk back his sycophancy to Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. However, he is at it again, apparently siding with Putin over American troops. Trump is now denying that he was ever briefed on intelligence that, as reported by the New York Times, the Kremlin has been secretly offering bounties to Taliban-linked militants to kill U.S. troops in Afghanistan. The Times reported that Trump and the White House National Security Council were briefed in late March, and that Trump took no action to retaliate or to prevent Russia from targeting U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. In a statement, the White House did not confirm or deny Russia's actions, but it did refute Trump's knowledge of any such allegation. Trump himself is tweeting this morning that he knew nothing of the claims, and yet still has nothing to say to his pal, old Vladimir Putin, who again is accused of offering bounties for the lives of Americans. On Saturday, the New York Times responded to the White House, reporting that one official said the intelligence was briefed at the highest levels, and another said it was in the president's daily brief. Perhaps most damning of all, quote, American officials reached on Saturday said it strained credulity to think that White House national security officials would be discussing such an important matter for months and even brief British officials about it and never provide the information to Mr. Trump. As Nancy Pelosi has so succinctly put it, when it comes to Trump, all roads lead to Putin. Joining me now is Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Malcolm Nance, the author of The Plot to Betray America, Jennifer Rubin, opinion writer for The Washington Post, and Charlie Savage, Washington correspondent for the New York Times and one of the reporters who broke this huge story. He's also the author of Power Wars. And Charlie, I'm going to start with you. I just want to reiterate for our audience. Kayleigh McEnany issued a statement, and here is what it said. The United States receives thousands of intelligence reports a day, and they're subject to strict scrutiny. While the White House does not routinely comment on alleged intelligence or internal deliberations, the CIA director, national security advisor, and the chief of staff can all confirm that neither the president nor the vice president were briefed on the alleged Russian bounty intelligence. This does not speak to the merit of the alleged intelligence, but the inaccuracy of the New York Times story erroneously suggested he was briefed on the matter. That does not seem credible, I'm sorry, I think, to most thinking people, that something of this importance would not be told to the U.S. commander-in-chief, that the soldiers under essentially his command, though he's a civilian, he's the top civilian that's in charge of the army, that's in charge of the military, would not be told that another country, a hostile foreign country, is offering bounties. I want you to reiterate from your reporting. What did Trump know, and when did he know it?
Absolutely. So the first thing I think that's important to notice about that statement is they're not denying that there was an intelligence assessment that the Russian government had offered bounties to Afghan militants and criminals to kill Americans and had paid out such bounties. They're not denying that. They're also not denying that the White House has known about this since at least March and convened an interagency meeting about it, even with the National Security Council in March. And so they also have not tried to push back on that. They're saying, well, Trump wasn't briefed, and we don't know if they're using the word briefed in some kind of highly specialized way, like maybe it was in his PDB presidential daily brief document, but he didn't read it. And then the guy who comes in every few days to tell him about what's in the document that he didn't read didn't mention it that day or something. We just don't know what to make of that statement. The other thing that's weird about that statement is it suggests the way Kayleigh McEnany described it was, well, the U.S. government receives reports, thousands of reports a day, as if this was a tip that came in from outside the government when this was an assessment report developed by this government. It's not just something randomly that showed up on the stoop one day. So having pointed both of those things out, all I can say is that we have a source who said that this was briefed at the highest levels of the White House, and we have a second source who says it was in the written presidential daily brief document. And that's what we have contra their statement to the contrary.
And sorry, but not reading your presidential daily brief, that's not an excuse. It's his job to read the presidential daily brief. If he doesn't feel like it, we don't care. That doesn't matter. The Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, has also come out and disputed your reporting, sir. I have confirmed, he says, that neither the president nor the vice president were ever briefed on any intelligence alleged by the New York Times in its reporting yesterday. The White House statement addressing the issue earlier today, which denied such a briefing occurred, was accurate. He goes on and on and on. The reality, again, and just put another fine point on it. In your reporting, how early was this briefed to the highest levels in the White House, meaning not just Donald Trump, not just likely Mike Pence, not just people at the senior levels of his administration? What is his national security advisor up to? When were they briefed on this?
We believe that it was in the PDB, written PDB, some time ago, and we know that, as in, not like this week, and we know that in late March, the National Security Council convened an interagency meeting specifically about this problem and what to do about it, but that since then no action has been taken. And I also, so that's what we know at this point. We're continuing to dig.
Yep. And do you know, in your reporting, how many times has Donald Trump spoken to Vladimir Putin between March of this year and this month?
So as we discussed yesterday, Joy, there was a call at the beginning of this month between the two of them. Whether there's been more, I can't say.
Okay, so let's broaden this out. Michael McFaul, is it at all credible to you that the President of the United States, that the Vice President, that the top levels of his government, the National Security Advisor, would not be fully briefed on Russia offering money, bounties to Taliban members to kill U.S. troops?
No. If it is, we'll get to if it is, how shocking that is, too. But I worked 3 years at the National Security Council, right? I wasn't just the U.S. ambassador in Russia. I worked there. I did those briefings. I was the person that briefed President Obama about all things Russian. And it is just crazy to think that I would have gotten a piece of information like that and not communicated it to the president. That's number one. Number two, if there were these NSC meetings, as Charlie just reported, how could the National Security Advisor, who's supposed to advise the president on national security matters every day, not bring it up? That does not seem credible to me. Three, I would just remind you that the fact checkers over at the Washington Post, in their book, the introduction starts with 16,000 falsehoods, I believe. So against the backdrop of that, why should anybody give them the benefit of the doubt that this is true? But finally, I want to really stress this point. If it is true, that is also incredibly shocking. First of all, as Charlie just said, they have not denied that this happened. This intelligence is not true. They had every chance to do it in all those statements, Joy. It never says that, right? So think about that. They have this incredibly shocking information that they're not giving to the president, all the while the president, one, is calling Vladimir Putin. That's a great point. When I got those packages ready for call packages to call Putin or Medvedev, intelligence like this was always in the call package. And two, he made some pretty big decisions. He's made a decision to invite Vladimir Putin to the G8 summit. He's made a decision to pull troops out of Germany. Surely in a conversation about those major policy decisions, somebody, I hope the National Security Advisor, would say, well, hey, Mr. President, we have this intelligence that might inform that decision. So the alibi is just as bad as the alleged thing that they did wrong in the first place. And then finally, I'm sorry to go on about this, but finally, if it is true and they haven't denied this intelligence, why hasn't any senior Trump administration official denounced it? Why haven't they said anything to say this is outrageous behavior, where there will be consequences to the Russian government? They haven't done that either. It's a very strange set of circumstances. And every which way you turn it, they seem like they're really dropping the ball when it comes to the security of American soldiers fighting for our country in Afghanistan.
Yep, and Russia, back in again. Just to back up what you just heard Ambassador McFaul say, Trump has now actually postponed the summit, the G7 summit, and his calls for Russia to attend it. This was from May 30th. So, again, it points to whether or not he can deny having received this briefing, because why on May 30 did Trump suddenly postpone his decision to try to make the G7 back into the G8 and invite Russia? That's one note. Trump has, by the way, confirmed, however, per the Washington Post, their plan to cut U.S. troops, our troops in Germany. Some probably will relocate to Poland, is reported by the Post. This is from June 24th. Also, after he allegedly received this briefing, quote, in Trump's view, the basing arrangements are free military power for Germany, but in the traditional U.S. military view, they are inexpensive launch points to project U.S. power against a potential, here we come, Russian threat, but also to the volatile Middle East and Afghanistan. Malcolm Nance, we know that 20 U.S. service members have been killed by hostile forces in Afghanistan thus far. What do you make of this blockbuster reporting, which I have to note NBC is not referring, NBC News is not confirmed it, so I need to note that. This is the reporting from the New York Times. What do you make of this reporting and Donald Trump's response?
Well, let me give you the perspective of a field intelligence collector who would have been the kind of person that would have gotten this information, fused this information, vetted this information, gone back and used either multi-source, multi-dimensional intelligence to build out a picture as to whether this was true. Here is something we do know. For the last 3 years, there have been reports that Russian intelligence through the GRU, which is Russian military intelligence, the SVR, Russian clandestine service, and using their private military contractors, PMC Wagner, have been operating some and have been supplying weapons to the Taliban. That reporting has been around for 3 years now. That this would have led to bounties that have been offered on U.S. service member is not out of the ordinary. You have to remember, we actually destroyed 250 Russian mercenaries that attempted to take a U.S. oil field in Syria that was backed by U.S. Special Forces. So they're not against using force against us. But let me tell you this. The statements by Kayleigh McEnany, the press secretary, Ratcliffe, the DNI, and now coming out of Donald Trump himself, I can tell you personally that these are lies. There is a special reporting communication system that we have set aside for very imminent, very critical threat intelligence when it is recognized and identified, which gets these reports to the desk of the president or into the president's hands 24/7, 365 in no more than 10 minutes for the initial report. Then it is followed up by subsequent reporting. Any report that they have confirmed or have intelligence that has been vetted and found to have been credible, that there was a bounty placed by the nation of Russia through its secret services on a U.S. service member would have been in his hands in 10 minutes. I have actually generated reports like this. These reports are not normal. When this all stemmed from the Cuban Missile Crisis, where people said they didn't have the intelligence. Whether Donald Trump read these reports, whether people withheld the reports, every aspect of their response is a failure and is fundamentally based on a lie. They are dancing around the word briefed, and we have lost 20 service members in Afghanistan. That's 5 Benghazis, according to the way that they count. So what we need to do is we need to determine through other sources, whether it's the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, to determine whether this type of critical communication went through that network or whether this was, some sort of reporting that came from another source and that was brought into the PDB or not. They are dancing around the word briefing, and it is disgraceful. Whether it happened or didn't happen should have been confirmed before this report went to the New York Times. And if they're denying it, then they're either incompetent idiots or they're liars. Both can be true.
And I want to bring Jennifer into this, and I want to first correct myself that NBC News has confirmed this reporting that's in the New York Times, not hasn't, but has. So that's also important to note. But I want to, Jennifer, you expect a certain response from the hawks in the Republican Party. There would have been a reflexive response. Imagine if this same reporting had dropped when the president's name was Barack Obama. Just the apoplexy that you would have heard from Republicans. Instead, it's been quite mild, I have to say, so far. But I want to first play what Joe Biden, who is running for president right now, former vice president of the United States, this was his response yesterday.
There is no bottom to the depth of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin's depravity, if that's true. Not only has he failed to sanction or impose any kind of consequences on Russia for this egregious violation of international law, Donald Trump has continued his embarrassing campaign of deference and debasing himself before Vladimir Putin. It's a betrayal of every single American family with a loved one serving in Afghanistan or anywhere overseas. And I'm quite frankly outraged by the report. And if I'm elected president, make no mistake about it, Vladimir Putin will be confronted and will impose serious cost on Russia.
There is the promise to confront Putin. That is from Vice President Biden. Now I want you to listen to Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, who was on this program yesterday when we told her and talked to her about this reporting. Here is what Democratic Congresswoman Dean said.
It is chilling. It is sickening. It's shocking, but maybe it shouldn't be. This is how rotten to the core this president is. He doesn't seem to have any compassion or understanding. He doesn't seem to really love this country. He doesn't seem to really understand our Constitution. He certainly curries favor with our enemies and disrespects and disregards our allies and our friends.
And now here is one Lindsey Graham, Superhawk, responding to the same exact news. He says it is imperative that Congress get to the bottom of recent media reports that Russian GRU units in Afghanistan have offered to pay the Taliban to kill American soldiers with the goal of pushing America out of the region. I expect the Trump administration to take such allegations seriously and inform Congress immediately as to, here we go, the reliability of these news reports. It's rather mild, Jennifer.
Good grief. First of all, Joe Biden is exactly correct. This is an outrage. And what we have seen happen, whatever the explanation, is that this has not been addressed. Vladimir Putin has done this, and the United States has been passive. It sends a signal not only to him, but now that it's in the public domain, every other enemy, you can take potshots at American military forces, and you'll have no consequences. In fact, the President of the United States will maybe suck up to your leaders. So it is the absence of any action, which is almost unbelievable. And I do share the outrage and consternation. There's two other points. One is, at least for the last year or so, we have had a shuffling of the deck throughout the intelligence agency. How many DNIs have we had? I've lost track. So it is not inconceivable, particularly when you have incompetent, highly political people in these spots, that they choose not to share some information. There is a quantum of possibility that that in fact occurred because you have people like Rick Grinnell and you have people like Radcliffe in these positions. And these people are political hacks. They are not trained intelligence people. They don't have a background. They don't have expertise. They are there to facilitate Donald Trump's political agenda. And I would add one additional point. You are exactly right. Where are the Tom Cottons of the world? Where are the Lindsey Grahams? That response sounds like there was some dispute about fishing in, international waters or something, relatively minor, picayune. There is no level of reaction. And where are these people hiding? Where's Ted Cruz? Where is the whole battery of people who spent years investigating Benghazi? It is really move on. So in many respects, it is just stunning. But I come back to the central point, and that is that we have not responded. Donald Trump hasn't responded. Our military hasn't responded. And as a result, Donald Trump has once more laid down at the feet of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and Charlie, to that very point, have you received, as this reporting has dropped, commentary, outrage, from Republican members of Congress saying this is an outrage, saying something similar to what Madeleine Dean said, what Joe Biden has said? Do you have any comments like that?
The most The most I've seen is the pair of tweets from Lindsey Graham that you showed on the screen a few minutes ago, saying this needs to be taken seriously. These sort of allegations need to be taken seriously. Let us know, White House, what's up with that. I agree that even as the Democratic Party has really jumped this, expressed a lot of outrage, the Republican Party leadership has been very quiet to date.
Very interesting. Ambassador Michael McFaul, Malcolm Nance, Charlie Savage, thank you all very much. Jennifer will be back in our next hour. And more on this story after the break.
When Trump tells you he stands by the troops, he's right. Just not our troops.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
The Lincoln Project is out with yet another devastating ad targeting Donald Trump, this time about the mind-blowing New York Times story that Russia is paying bounties for U.S. troops' lives in Afghanistan and that Trump has done absolutely nothing to stop them. And joining me now is Steve Schmidt, an advisor to the Lincoln Project. He's also a former Republican strategist and a political analyst for MSNBC. As somebody that's got, very close friends and family that have done military service, this story just really just punched me in the face when I saw it. And I want to just get your gut reaction to it. Obviously, we know what your collective reaction at the Lincoln Project was. What was your personal reaction to it?
All I could think about was this, Joy. I think about the ethos of the American military, about not leaving anyone behind, about the extraordinary measures that are taken to preserve the dignity of the human soul of a soldier, airman, sailor, Marine killed in action. What I thought about is the moment when the American soldier or the remaining parts are zipped into a body bag, then packed in ice and put into an aluminum casket. That aluminum casket draped with an American flag, the blue field and the 50 stars draped towards the head of the fallen. The body is never unaccompanied. It's loaded onto a military aircraft to be brought back to the United States, to Dover, Delaware. It'll be carried on to the aircraft past service members standing at attention and saluting. There will be a comrade in arms who will accompany the body and never leave that casket alone for the entire duration of the journey home to the United States until the moment of burial. Within 12 hours of death, 2 casualty assistant officers will pull up in immaculately pressed dress uniforms and knock on an American family's door, deliver the devastating news. There will be a funeral. The rifle volleys will crack the air, volley of 3 in salute. Taps will be played. And then the American flag will be folded, and it will be presented in most instances to a young widow with young kids on behalf of a grateful nation. And then what happens next is some Russian intelligence officer somewhere will pay off an Afghan warlord who's responsible for the death of that American. And the President of the United States knew about it, and he did absolutely nothing about it. In fact, what he did is reward Russia by helping them achieve their foreign policy aims with the withdrawal of American troops from Germany, with their admission back into the G8. And to Jennifer Rubin's point, which I'm broadly indifferent to, and I don't know, in fact, what's worse, that he knew and did nothing, or that he didn't know. And the incompetence of the administration is such that we see it in the consequences of coronavirus, where 125,000 Americans are dead and many, many more to come, a shattered economy, the corruption, the indecency, the stench of this administration will linger through the ages. And everyone associated with it, who's been complicit, who's collaborated with it, who has defended the indefensible, the stench will linger around them too. The Tom Cottons, who have betrayed the very soldiers that he once led in combat through his complicit silence, the Lindsey Grahams, a reserve colonel in the United States Air Force, all of them. This is a disgusting moment in American history and in American life. For the first time, we have an American president who simply refuses to defend the country, the Constitution, kowtows, and gets on his knees with deference to a hostile foreign powers autocratic leader. What a rancid moment in the life of the American nation.
You know, and it's something that seems so unimaginable. You know, we've had bad presidents, we've had racist presidents, we've had garbage presidents like Andrew Johnson, we've had Andrew Jackson, we've had Woodrow Wilson, a horrible man, but never have we had a president who seemed to have an ethos that was antithetical to defending his own country and that seemed so enamored with a foreign country. I've never seen anything like it. We were talking yesterday in the little after show, you know, I mean, France helped liberate this country. You never saw genuflection toward the King of France. You know, you've never seen anything like this. George Washington was cousin to the King of England. There was no genuflection toward Britain. It is very strange, and we'll just put it that way. But it is not unusual for this president in the sense that on the monuments issue, on the issue of the Confederacy, which declared itself a foreign country, so they said they are not America anymore. They said they were another country. Donald Trump also reveres their leaders. He reveres their generals. I've never heard him talk about Ulysses S. Grant with the reverence that he talks about Robert E. Lee. The Lincoln Project tweeted yesterday that Donald Trump will defend a Confederate statue but not an American soldier. Trump just this morning, right after denying the Russia story, tweets out, since imposing a very powerful 10-year sentence on those who vandalize monuments, statues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the vandalism has completely stopped. He signed an executive order to prosecute people who destroy the monuments of slaveholders who declared themselves to be a foreign country. And he reveres them. But he does not seem to revere the United States Constitution or its systems or its military. It is weird. It is just weird.
We're in this moment in time, and I joked around on Twitter last week that it's as if Charles Lindbergh and George Wallace adopted a baby and he grew up to be president of the United States. It's just this extraordinary moment. We spent 75 years looking, studying, remembering the fascism that we paid such a high price to defeat. And we asked the question, could it happen here? And for almost 75 years, the answer was, of course it could. Never, not in the United States of America. But we see the entirety of the Republican Party, every member of Congress, really with the exception of Mitt Romney, has completely subordinated their agency, their patriotism, their common sense, their judgment to be members of a cult of personality that reveres Donald Trump and will defend anything that he does, no matter how indefensible it is. And so we think about Donald Trump going to Mount Rushmore. That's not his place in the shadow of some of our greatest leaders. His place is at Stone Mountain in Georgia with the leaders of the failed slave state, the Confederacy. He reveres them and their symbols and their mythology as the country's trying to finally put it down and to move on from it. And so Donald Trump's priorities, every one of them seem to be aligned with the proposition of American weakness. He's weakening the country. We look like a banana republic in response to coronavirus. We are the epicenter of its death and suffering in the world. We are the most mismanaged country with regard to dealing with it in the civilized world, without any question. We look at the whole spectrum of this administration's actions, from the caging of children on our border, from the destruction of our values, the checks and balances eviscerated, our constitutional norms assaulted, the rule of law attacked, all of it in a stunning moment. And the question now is, who will stand up for the United States? who will fight for America? Because in the end now, the American people have to do the job that our political leadership has not done. We have to put an end to this. We have to put a stop to it in November. And the American people this morning should be filled with rage, with a righteous anger that our young men and women, that Donald Trump had the gall to go to West Point and return the salutes of young second lieutenants who will soon be bound for Afghanistan with bounties, with contracts on their head that he knew about and did nothing about. I can't imagine that there has ever been a more shameful moment around the office of President of the United States in the entirety of the history of the country. We are in America's most rancid era because we have a president who is fundamentally anti-American. He doesn't understand our ideas, our ideals. He doesn't understand that it's his job to be part of the struggle to close the gap between our reality and those ideas and ideals, to do the work of Americans to make our country more just. It is a truly, truly despicable hour in the history of our country.
It absolutely is. And I believe, Steve Schmidt, you are the person who coined the term that Donald Trump is the first president of the Confederacy, because that it seems to be what he wants to be.
Second.
The question
him and
is,
Jefferson Davis.
Second president, sorry. Second president of the Confederacy, exactly.
They could be opposite sides of the same Confederate coin.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here this morning and sharing what I'm sure is all of our viewers' outrage. All right, and coming up, contrary to the lies coming out of the White House, the coronavirus spread is actually more rampant than ever because it's all terrible. There's just so much more. That is next.
This resurgence of cases, I don't think there's time enough now all day to try and analyze and figure out the multifaceted elements that went into that. You know, everything from maybe opening a little bit too early on some to opening at the right time, but not actually following the steps in an orderly fashion. You have an individual responsibility to yourself, but you have a societal responsibility, because if we want to end this outbreak, this is part of a process that we can be either part of the solution or part of the problem.
Just 2 days after Dr. Anthony Fauci made those comments, global cases of COVID-19 have topped 10 million this morning. The U.S. makes up nearly a third of that total, more than 2.5 million of those cases. And now the health crisis is colliding with the immigration crisis at the southern border. Since the start of the pandemic, more than 2,500 adults in detention centers have tested positive for COVID-19. Citing concerns over the spread of the virus, a federal judge ruled on Friday that ICE must release children who have been detained for more than 20 days by July 17th, although the fate of their parents remains unclear. The ruling came 1 day after ICE reported its first coronavirus cases among detained migrant families with children. 11 family members at the Karnes County Residential Center in South Texas have tested positive for the virus. And joining me now, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington. She's the vice chair of the Immigration and Citizenship Subcommittee. Jacob Soboroff, MSNBC correspondent and author of Separated: Inside an American Tragedy, which will be released July 7th. And Maria Teresa Kumar, MSNBC contributor and president and CEO of Voto Latino. Thank you all for being here. And Congresswoman Jayapal, I want to start with you. More on this judge's ruling. This is what the judge ruled. The matter is now in the hands of ICE, which had 124 children at those facilities in Texas and Pennsylvania as of June 8. According to the ruling applies only to children. It does not compel ICE to release parents. Is that enough?
Well, first of all, it is an important ruling because we continue to see this administration operating with zero principled leadership, with maximum cruelty and maximum corruption. And so what the judge is saying is, not only do you have to release these children, you have to release them by a specific date in just a couple of weeks. And that is important because we have been fighting with this administration to release separated families and keep them together. As you know, Joy, I've been on your show so many times. We are saying, and the Judiciary Committee has already weighed in with ICE to say that these kids must be released with their parents. Now, the order does allow for ICE to either release them separately to a family member or a guardian, or to release them with their parents. So let's be clear, if they separate children again from their parents, it is a conscious decision, and it again shows us the maximum cruelty of this administration. You were talking about the numbers of people who have tested positive in detention centers. We should just say that that is the number that equates to 50% of all of those who have been tested. Not everybody in detention centers have been tested. And that's why I and Senator Booker have written a bill and introduced a bill to allow for, to actually force ICE to release all of the most vulnerable populations. That would include, of course, children. It would include vulnerable adults, and to go through a real process, because let's be clear, most of these people do not need to be in detention centers. There are alternatives to detention that are 1/10 of the cost of keeping these families in detention. And it is absolute inhumanity to keep not only these children in violation of the Flores Agreement, but also to keep all of these adults who do not need to be in these incarceral facilities where COVID is spreading. And the judge said in her order that these detention centers are on fire. It was a scathing order. She said that ICE is absolutely not paying attention to any CDC guidelines, public health guidelines. In fact, she said that ICE is hiding behind their own incomplete written protocols instead of adhering to CDC public health guidelines. And these are our most vulnerable people in incarceral facilities. They do not need to be there. These children have already suffered enormous harm, long-term damage, and they need to be released with their parents as soon as, immediately, but certainly before the judge's order rules.
Yeah, and Jacob, you've done such great work covering this, and I know your book, Separated, is going to dig more into your reporting. ICE has released a statement saying the following. This is this ICE spokesperson. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is currently reviewing the most recent order issued by the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California yesterday on the Flores litigation. They're just reviewing it. They need to get on it. The challenge. NBC reported last month that faced with a choice, migrant parents in ICE detention have refused to separate from their children. Not one of the 366 families of Immigration Customs Enforcement detention agreed to be separated from their children when asked by the agency last week. Several immigration lawyers and a senior ICE official said they're still trying to separate kids. And you and I both know that we don't even know how many kids they've got. Nor did I see in Tornillo, and nor I don't think you've reported, that they have a system to find the parents of the children that they've taken. So how do they even implement this order if they don't know where the parents are?
I'm glad you brought that up, Joy. The track record is horrific, particularly with regard to the 5,000 plus children that were systematically separated by the Trump administration exactly 2 summers ago in 2018. And I want to be really clear about what we're all talking about right now. The Trump administration has until July 17th to decide if it will separate the 124 kids and their parents in its custody from each other, or release them together. And you read the statement in response to a query from our colleague, Julia Ainsley. This weekend, the Trump administration, ICE, would not commit to not separating these children from their families as a way to get them out of the explosion of COVID cases inside ICE detention. I think that is ultimately the bottom line, that they will not commit to not separating children from their families, and they have until July 17th to come up with a plan. What you're hearing from activists and lawyers and others that are advocating on behalf of these migrant children is ICE has discretion to release these families and their children together right now. They could do it as we're talking if they wanted to, but they haven't committed to that. And so now we are 2 days since the judge's order, no update from ICE about what they're going to do. But what everybody's saying is it's plain and simple. They could do it now if they wanted to. They're just not doing it.
They're just not doing it. And Maria Teresa, there's a New York Times report, and this is from June of last year, June of 2019. And the headline is, "There is a stench. Soiled clothes and no baths for migrant children at a Texas center." CBS has more recent reporting saying that more than 2,500 adult immigrants have tested positive for the coronavirus while in ICE custody. According to the agency's latest tally, more than 800 of them remain in isolation or observation. Some have been released. So far, the agency has said that 2 detainees have died of coronavirus complications while in its custody. But even before that, Maria Teresa, we had young migrants dying of the flu. We had deaths reported, that we didn't even get until much later. You and I have talked about this. This is the nightmare, that they would bunch these children up in some facility somewhere where they're all crammed in together, and then measles would break out. And then what would they do if measles broke out or something else broke out? And now it's coronavirus.
I think that, Joy, it's been 2 years since you and I were in Tornillo when we were actually highlighting the first internment camp for children on American soil. And this is not only negligence, but it's malpractice, and it's all under the Trump administration's watch, and it's purposeful. The fact that over 8 children have already died in custody that we know of is not only cruel, but intentional. Sadly, when we talk about what the judge just ordered, it is saying that it's letting ICE have discretion on whether or not to keep these families together and let both the parent, the whole unit out. I want to underscore, though, that many of these children are still breastfeeding. This is how babies they are. The idea of separating them again from their parents is not only cruel, but it's a false equivalency. You're giving parents a false binary choice. Stay with me and perhaps get infected with corona, or you leave and you no longer have that parental protection. We know by the American Doctors Psychologists Association, we know from the UN that we are in direct violation of children's rights by family separation. And we have to underscore, 2 of these 3 facilities are for-profit detention prison companies. There is no leverage for them not to keep these family units, to separate these families, because they make a lot of money under the backs of dehumanizing asylum seekers. The majority of the folks are seeking asylum, which is not a crime in the United States of America. In fact, Joy, we wrote the international make sure that we are voting them out in November. Tell me, Joy, yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Make sure that we are protesting in the streets, but make sure that we are voting them out in November. Tell me, Joy, yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I was just going to say, to ask if there's anything that Congress can do. I know we're out of time, but Congresswoman, is there some action that Congress is going to be able to take? I was even going to ask you about USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, furloughing 70% of its workforce. Do they even have the capacity to fix this at this point? And can Congress do anything?
We have passed bill after bill to stop the Trump administration, and the Republicans in the Senate refuse to stand up and speak out against this administration on anything, as Steve Schmidt was saying earlier, and that includes the cruelty of this administration towards migrant families, towards children. But one thing I think I've been advocating for a long time is we should really condition the funding of DHS on their upholding of these legal orders. And, this is a tough thing in Congress, but I really believe that we have to use the leverage we have. And the only leverage we really have at this point is funding. Now, recognizing that this is a divided Congress with Republicans in the Senate who refuse to do this. But the other thing is we have to continue. We can't get tired of talking about the outrage. I know sometimes it feels we just talk about the outrage and we can't do anything. But the reality is we do have certain powers. We should use the oversight powers. I still remember, I was the first member of Congress to go into a federal prison where over 200 moms and dads were being held, separated from their kids, and talking to these moms who literally were weeping inconsolably because they did not even know where their children were for weeks on weeks. And I remember in the hearing having one of the head of the child psychologist who was, operating many of these programs at ORR, saying these children, and he spoke out and he tried to stop this from happening. He was not successful, but he spoke out at the hearing and said, this is long-term devastating damage.
Absolutely, yeah. It's child abuse, and it's disgusting. It's horrible, but I'm glad that we're talking about this again. We need to keep this story. We cannot stop talking about the outrage of what's being done to these babies, these children, and their parents. These are moms, dads, and families. It's despicable. Thank you all for being on top of this. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Jacob Soboroff, Maria Teresa Kumar, thank you all so much. Truly appreciate you.
Thanks,
and with less than 5 months until the president